Slave breeding, medical experimentation, and rampant human trafficking. Such inhumane practices spanned for centuries, not just in the Americas, but through various countries all around the world. Slavery is a sin that some want to forget, and a truth that we must refuse to let die. It is a chapter in human history full of immense suffering and injustice. These stories have been buried within time and hidden beneath tales of progress. But we must dig into these stories so we may reflect on them, as one must remember the mistakes of history so such may never be repeated. That said, let us sail into this journey of remembrance and commemoration for all of our brothers and sisters who suffered through the harsh eras of slavery. That said, let's open our hearts to remembrance as we take a look at 25 historical facts about slavery that are certainly haunting. Give this video a like to show your support and subscribe so you can always be part of our insightful discussions. With that, let's begin. Number 1. Slave breeding. A horrifying practice that came shortly after the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. And yes, it is as terrible as it sounds. Because slave owners could no longer import slaves from Africa, these people, with their greed and cruelty, devised slave breeding as a new, abhorrent practice to increase their workforce and profits. Simply put, slave breeding was the systematic forcing of slaves to have children to increase the wealth of their owners. Slave owners would select enslaved men and women for breeding based on perceived desirable traits, such as physical strength or perceived fertility, and would sometimes offer rewards for enslaved women who bore many children or punish those who resisted. This abhorrent practice not only violated the basic human rights of enslaved people, but also tore families apart. Children born into slavery were often separated from their mothers at a young age, sold, or put to work. Number 2. Medical experimentation. During the antebellum period in the United States, enslaved individuals were often subjected to painful and dangerous procedures without their consent, their bodies seen as expendable resources for medical research and experimentation. One notable example of this was the work of Dr. James Marion Sims. Known as the father of modern gynecology, Sims conducted numerous experimental surgeries on enslaved women without anesthesia. Despite the excruciating pain and potentially life-threatening nature of his experiments, Sims legally needed permission only from the enslaved women's owners. He performed painful experiments without anesthesia on Lucy, an enslaved black woman, while other doctors observed. Sims' experiments on Lucy were unsuccessful and nearly killed her due to severe blood poisoning. Nevertheless, he continued performing procedures on other enslaved women, sometimes drugging them to prevent resistance. Sims subjected Anarcha, an enslaved teenager, to at least 13 operations without anesthesia before he developed a repair technique considered safe to attempt on white patients. Unable to refuse treatment or withhold consent, Lucy, Anarcha, and Sims's other enslaved patients were powerless against medical exploitation. During and after enslavement, physicians often denied black people basic dignity and personhood, reflecting the dehumanizing myth that black people were less sensitive to pain than white people. Although Sims was historically praised for his contributions to medicine, people are now acknowledging the cruel and inhumane treatment he inflicted on black women during his experiments. As a result of this reevaluation, a statue of Sims was removed from Central Park in New York City in April 2018, although another statue of him still remains at the Alabama state capitol. Number 3. Savage dogs were used to hunt runaway slaves. Escaped slaves presented a challenge for slaveholders as they were difficult to track and potentially dangerous to apprehend. In response, plantation owners developed a terrifying solution, breeding vicious dogs specifically for the purpose of hunting down runaways. These dogs are often a mix of powerful breeds like bloodhounds and bulldogs. They were trained to track, attack, and capture escaped slaves with aggression. The use of these dogs instilled terror in the hearts of enslaved individuals as they became symbols of the brutality and dehumanization inherent in the slave system. In a twisted display of power, slaveholders often allowed the dogs to maul captured runaways, inflicting severe injuries before subduing the animals. This practice served not only as a form of punishment, but also as a chilling warning to other slaves who might contemplate escaping. Number 4. The Zong mass killing. In 1781, the captain of the slave ship Zong ordered the drowning of 132 enslaved Africans during their journey to Jamaica. Upon returning to England, the ship's owners sought compensation for their lost cargo from their insurer. The case might have been successful if not for Olaudah Equiano, a formerly enslaved man living in England. He learned of the Zong mass killing and brought it to the attention of an abolitionist friend, leading to a court case. Initially, the court ruled in favor of the ship owners, likening the enslaved Africans to animals that could be killed for the ship's safety. However, the insurance company appealed, and in the retrial, the court recognized the enslaved Africans as people, not property. Number 5, a black man owned slaves. In the 17th century, a black man named Anthony Johnson was brought to Virginia as an indentured servant. Indentured servitude is a type of labor arrangement where a person agrees to work for free for a set period of time in exchange for something like debt repayment or travel expenses. After Anthony had finished his indentured servitude, he eventually gained his freedom and acquired land and servants, even legally owning a black man named John Kazor for life. This has been used by some to argue that slavery was not rooted in racism, but rather economics, as a black man was also a slave owner. However, this story is quite misleading. The first documented case of a lifetime enslavement in the colonies was that of John Punch, a black man sentenced to lifetime servitude for attempting to escape his indenture in 1640. His white companions who escaped with him received only additional years on their indenture. Doesn't this show the early unequal treatment for black individuals? His descendants were ultimately dispossessed of their land and likely lost their freedom due to increasing anti-black racism in the colony. While Johnson's story is unique, it is often misused to downplay the role of racism in American slavery. Number 6, slaves were branded like cattle. Branding enslaved people was a brutal practice used by slave owners throughout history, including in the American colonies. Branding was not only a way to mark property, but also a form of punishment and dehumanization. The practice dates back to ancient times and was used extensively during the transatlantic slave trade. Abolitionists highlighted the brutality of branding to expose the inhumanity of slavery. Different methods were employed, with heated irons being the most common, but acid and gunpowder were also used in some cases. Branding left lasting physical and psychological scars on enslaved individuals, a constant reminder of their dehumanization. As such, some individuals attempted to alter or remove their brands as a form of resistance and defiance. Number 7, African sold slaves. The Atlantic slave trade involved the active participation of African rulers and traders who sold fellow Africans, often prisoners of war, to European slave ships. This exchange was not one-sided, as African leaders received valuable European goods, particularly weapons, in return for slaves. These weapons facilitated further conquests, leading to a cycle of warfare and enslavement within Africa. Contrary to popular belief, the initial trade between Europeans and Africans did not involve slaves. African rulers initially traded ivory and gold for European goods. However, the demand for slave labor in the Americas led to a shift in this trade, with enslaved Africans becoming a significant commodity in the exchange. This contributed to the devastating impact of the slave trade on African societies, fueling conflict and instability for centuries. Number 8, free black individuals were abducted and sold back into slavery. The Underground Railroad, a network of safe houses aiding enslaved people in their escape to freedom, emerged before the Civil War. However, a counter-network known as the Reverse Underground Railroad arose in response. This system involved kidnapping runaway slaves and free black individuals in the North, transporting them to the South, and selling them back into slavery. These kidnapped free blacks faced immense challenges in proving their freedom due to biased court systems that often dismissed their documentation as forged. Additionally, laws prohibiting blacks from testifying against whites in court further hampered their ability to defend themselves. The Reverse Underground Railroad is one of the persistent threats of re-enslavement faced by black individuals, even in supposedly free states, and the systemic racism embedded within the legal system. Number 9, 25-year-old men were the best slaves. Slaveholders, driven by the pursuit of profit, provided enslaved individuals with only the bare minimum for survival, forcing them to toil from dawn till dusk. In a perverse twist, young women were often valued more than men until puberty due to their potential to bear children who would also be enslaved. The most valuable slaves were considered to be men around 25 years old, due to their perceived peak physical ability and potential for labor output. This callous disregard for human life and the reduction of individuals to mere commodities proves the dehumanizing nature of slavery. The value placed on enslaved people was not based on their inherent worth as human beings, but rather on their potential for economic exploitation. This commodification of human life was a fundamental aspect of the slave system, shaping the experiences of enslaved individuals and perpetuating the cycle of oppression. Number 10, slave owners used a different kind of Bible just to justify slavery. In an attempt to indoctrinate enslaved people into Christianity while maintaining control, slaveholders in the British West Indies created a heavily edited version of the Bible known as the Slave Bible. This version excluded passages that could potentially inspire rebellion, such as the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, and emphasized stories that seemed to normalize slavery, like the tale of Joseph's enslavement. The Slave Bible served as a tool of manipulation, aiming to quell any thoughts of resistance among the enslaved population. The creators of this altered text, whether plantation owners or missionaries, sought to instill a sense of acceptance of their subjugated status in the slaves. This act of religious censorship highlights the lengths to which those in power would go to maintain control and suppress dissent. Number 11. Fleeing slaves were considered mentally ill. Samuel Cartwright, a physician in the pro-slavery American South, used his medical expertise to uphold the institution of slavery. He published a report that falsely claimed black people were biologically inferior to whites, with smaller brains and immature nervous systems, making them naturally suited for servitude. He even went so far as to assert that black individuals could only find happiness in slavery. In a blatant attempt to pathologize resistance, Cartwright invented a mental disorder called drapetomania, supposedly afflicting slaves who attempted to escape their masters. He prescribed inhumane treatments for this fake condition, including whippings and amputations. Number 12. Slaves' laziness was also considered a mental disorder. Not content with inventing drapetomania, Samuel Cartwright also fabricated another fictitious mental disorder called dysesthesia ethiopica, which he falsely claimed caused laziness in enslaved people. According to Cartwright, this condition stemmed from decreased skin sensitivity, leading to sluggishness and a perceived lack of effort. Cartwright paradoxically asserted that this illness was more prevalent in free black individuals due to a supposed lack of care from masters.